Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are diving deep into one of the most famous, most foundational verses in the entire New Testament. I'm talking, of course, about John chapter 1, verse 14. We're going to follow a trail of clues and see if we can solve a really fascinating puzzle hidden right inside the text.
Here it is. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It's so short, right? But it is absolutely packed with power and centuries of theological thought. It's one of those lines that's so profound, and as we're about to see, it has some incredible layers of meaning.
Now, for the vast majority of people, this phrase points to one single monumental event, God becoming a human being. And you can see why. It's a direct, powerful reading of the text, and it's the absolute cornerstone of the doctrine of the Incarnation.
But what if there's another way to look at this? What if the author is using the word flesh not to talk about a physical substance, but as a powerful metaphor for something else? That's the puzzle we're going to dig into today.
So, let's start our investigation with our very first clue. And the cool thing is, we don't even have to look that far. We're going to find it right here inside the Gospel of John itself.
You see, the author of this gospel has this really cool writing style. He'll introduce these huge, often metaphorical ideas right at the beginning, in the prologue, and then he spends the rest of the book unpacking them for us. It's like the book comes with its own built-in dictionary. For example, he introduces the true height, and then later, Jesus says point blank, "I am the light of the world." See? He defines his own terms.
And wouldn't you know it, the author does the exact same thing with the word flesh. He drops it here in chapter 1, and then bam, in chapter 6, it becomes the central focus of a huge teaching where Jesus himself connects the idea of his flesh to life-giving bread.
So here's the key takeaway. The text itself is defining its own metaphor. In John chapter 6, flesh is not about biology. It's about spiritual sustenance. It's the life-giving provision from God. This is our first major clue, and it's a big one.
Okay, let's move on to our second clue, and you'll see how this starts to build, because this use of metaphor isn't a one-time thing, not at all. It's actually a defining feature of the entire book.
And we don't even have to guess about this. Jesus just comes right out and says it. He tells his followers that he often speaks in figures of speech. The book is literally telling us how we're supposed to read it.
And just look at this. The entire gospel is this incredible tapestry of metaphors, all used to explain who Jesus is. He is the Word, the true light, the Lamb, the temple, the true bread, the true vine. He's not literally a lamb or a loaf of bread, right? These are all figures of speech that point to a much deeper spiritual truth about him.
So this leads us to a pretty logical question. If we're all okay with saying Jesus became bread is a metaphor for him being our spiritual food, then why would we insist that the Word became flesh has to be a literal metaphysical transformation? The pattern of the book itself suggests we should be looking for a consistent metaphorical meaning.
All right, our final clue is going to take us on a trip back in time, out of the gospel and into the long history of Israel, because there's an ancient pattern there that just makes this whole metaphor click perfectly into place.
Now, to get this, we need to understand a really key biblical concept: type and antitype. A type is basically a person or an event in the Old Testament that acts like a blueprint or a shadow of a greater reality to come. And the antitype is the fulfillment of that blueprint. Think of it like a preview of the main event. And right here, we see that pattern in action. In the book of Exodus, when Israel was starving in the desert, what did God do? He provided bread from heaven, the manna, and he provided flesh in the form of quail. This was God's physical provision to save them. Now, you fast forward to John 6. Jesus declares he is the true bread from heaven and offers his flesh for the eternal life of the world. It is the exact same pattern, just elevated from physical life to eternal life.
So, with these three major clues on the table, the Gospel's own dictionary, the book's heavily metaphorical style, and this ancient pattern from Israel's history, let's put the puzzle pieces together and see the final picture.
First, let's geek out just for a second on the grammar, because it's actually really important. When the text says the Word became flesh, it's the same structure as saying John became a teacher. Now, John didn't change his fundamental nature, did he? No, he took on a new role. The grammar here points to a new function, not a change in being. And we see this exact same structure used elsewhere in the Bible. Over in Luke, it says, Jonah became a sign. Jonah didn't stop being a person and morph into a literal signpost. No, he, as a person, took on the function of being a sign. The word became is all about starting a new role.
So when you put all of this evidence together, the conclusion seems pretty clear. We are reading a profound and powerful metaphor, not a literal statement about a change in divine substance. It's a declaration that's deeply rooted in Israel's history and the author's own unique literary style.
So what is this metaphor declaring? It's proclaiming that the human person, Jesus of Nazareth, who is called the Word because he is God's ultimate revelation, took on the role of being God's final ultimate provision for humanity. Just like God gave flesh in the desert for physical life, he has now, through Jesus, given flesh for eternal life.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If we read flesh not as a physical substance, but as divine sustenance, how does that shift our entire understanding of this famous foundational verse? It's a change in perspective that really invites us to look at this familiar text with totally fresh eyes.